Engines on. 5, 4, 3, 2. All engines running. Launch commenced. Liftoff. We have liftoff 49 minutes past the hour. Staffing reports the clock has started. The tower is clear.
The Apollo missions to the moon were probably the highlight of our entire space program so far. Thousands of people worked tirelessly for years so that 12 men could walk on the moon and return safely home. We've all seen the moon countless times. Often, we tend to take it for granted, and we don't appreciate its beauty. But there's much more to appreciate than just its beauty. Like the Earth, the moon was created and uniquely designed for us. First of all, the moon's gravity raises tides in the Earth's oceans. This is crucial to life on Earth. The moon's tides help to circulate ocean water, which prevents our oceans from becoming stagnant. This allows fish and other creatures to live there. The moon is at just the right distance for this. If it were much farther away, it wouldn't raise high enough tides. On the other hand, if it were much closer, the tides would be too high, and they would be harmful to us. But the moon was created for more than just tides. The Bible says the moon was created for signs and seasons for us here on Earth, and it's uniquely positioned for this. As the moon goes around the Earth, it regularly passes between the Earth and the sun. When this happens, if you're at the right spot on the Earth, you can see an eclipse. Notice how the moon blocks out the sun exactly. The moon is 400 times smaller than the sun, but the sun is 400 times farther away than the moon. This makes these eclipses possible. As you see here, it also allows us to study parts of the sun's atmosphere, things that we couldn't see otherwise thanks to the sun's blinding light. A total eclipse is known to be one of the most awe-inspiring events in all of creation. Each time one occurs, people travel from all over the world to see it. There are well over 100 other moons in our solar system, yet none of them produce eclipses like this for the planets they orbit. Only our moon has the exact combination of size, position, and distance that produces these beautiful events.
We'll call you. Roger that.
Except for the Earth itself, the moon is the most widely studied object in our solar system. It's the only other object that people have walked on. The moon has some fascinating lessons to teach us. The side of the moon that we see from Earth is dominated by several features. The large dark areas that you see here on the surface are called maria. These are believed to be large flows of hardened lava. Here's a closer look. Notice how the mare area is smooth and lower than the rugged highlands behind it. The maria are believed to be huge impact basins. Sometime during the moon's past, some large objects hit the moon, forming these huge basins. These impacts were so severe that they cracked the moon's crust, causing lava to ooze out and fill the basins in. This seems like a reasonable explanation so far, but here's a question. How much time passed between the impacts and the lava coming out? It seems obvious that this wouldn't have taken long at all. A few hours, a few days, maybe as long as a week or two. But evolutionists believe that 500 million years passed in between the impacts and the lava. Why do they believe this? Because in many places on the moon, we can see things called ghost craters. Ghost craters are craters that are sticking up from underneath the maria. They had been partially filled in by lava, but not completely erased. That's why we can still see them. Here's another example. Notice that some craters are sharp and clear. These obviously formed after the lava filled in the maria, so these are not ghost craters. The ghost craters are the ones, like these, that are peeking up from underneath the hardened lava. These craters existed on the floors of the impact basins before the lava came and partially filled them. This means they formed after the giant impacts happened, but before the lava came out from the impacts. Here's why this is important. Because evolutionists believe in billions of years, they have concluded that, except for a short period early in the solar system's history, new craters form very slowly. Otherwise, there would be a lot more craters on the moon's maria, for example. But there are a lot of ghost craters on the moon. Since evolutionists have to believe in a slow rate of cratering, they're forced to believe that it took a good 500 million years or so for all these ghost craters to form. Does this idea make sense? No, it doesn't. Obviously, such huge impacts would have had an effect on the moon immediately. It's ridiculous to think that the moon would wait a half billion years or so before it reacted to these collisions. The only reason evolutionists believe this is because they're committed to their billions of years. But if we look at the evidence without being influenced by evolutionary prejudices, what do we see? We see evidence that cratering rates used to be a lot higher in the past than today. And this affects our understanding of planets and moons all over the solar system. We talked about this during our look at Venus. Remember, Venus's surface looks very young, but evolutionists say it's at least 500 million years old, because cratering is such a slow process. Our moon shows us that cratering is not such a slow process as evolutionists believe. And that means the planets and moons in our solar system are a lot younger than you're being told. As we look at the moon, many people have wondered, how did the moon get here? Where did it come from? Well, the Bible tells us clearly where it came from. It was created on day 4 of creation week. And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years." And God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. And the evening and the morning were the 4th day. The moon was made to mark out times and seasons and to rule the night. Indeed, it is the dominant light in the nighttime sky. But evolutionists don't want to accept creation, so they look for other answers. In fact, evolutionists were very excited about the Apollo moon program back in the 1960s for just this reason. They thought that the lunar missions would help them understand how the moon could have formed all by itself, without a creator being involved. This is Apollo 17 astronaut Harrison Schmitt. He was not only the last astronaut to walk on the moon, he was also a PhD geologist as well. Schmitt and the other astronauts gathered samples from the moon's surface and brought back hundreds of pounds of moon rocks with them. These rocks revealed some very interesting things about the moon. At the time, there were 3 main evolutionary theories for the origin of the moon. Evolutionary scientists were eager to analyze the moon rocks and see which of their theories was right. The 3 theories were the fission theory, the nebula theory, and the capture theory. Let's talk about each one. The fission theory said that the early Earth was spinning very rapidly. Then a chunk of material tore off and became the moon. This theory had problems though. Tests showed that lunar rocks are different than Earth rocks in some important ways. For example, the moon is deficient in iron when compared to the Earth. Also, if this idea was true, the Earth would have been spinning incredibly quickly. It would have been rotating just once every 2.5 hours or so. Problem: how did it slow down to today's speed of once every 24 hours? All that excess spin energy would have had to have gone somewhere. Calculations showed that this amount of energy would have been enough to raise the temperature of the entire Earth by 1,000 degrees Celsius. This would have boiled away all the Earth's oceans. Therefore, since we still have oceans today, we know this theory is wrong. The nebula theory said that the Earth and Moon formed out of a swirling cloud of gas and dust. This is just like the overall evolutionary theory for our solar system, with the gas turning into planets, but just on a smaller scale. The problem here is that this meant the Earth and the Moon were formed from the same stuff, and the Apollo missions showed that moon rocks are different than Earth rocks. There are also real problems in getting the Earth and Moon to form from a cloud like that. The third theory was the capture theory. This says that the Moon formed elsewhere in our solar system and was traveling along one day when it passed too close to the Earth. The Earth's gravity pulled it in, where it took up housekeeping and started orbiting our planet where it is today. There are several problems with this idea. The biggest one is that one object can't capture another one gravitationally like this, not without interacting with other objects too. If it were just the Moon approaching the Earth, then the Earth's gravity would have accelerated the Moon on the way in. By the time the Moon arrived, it would be going too fast to stay in orbit. So there would only be 2 options. Either the Moon would hit the Earth, or else it would zoom on by and get flung away on the other side. Either way, you don't get an orbit. So, the Apollo missions left evolutionists in a turmoil. It's interesting to read their debates from the time. None of the evolutionists could really argue, well, my theory is right, because each theory had fatal flaws. Instead, they all said, well, it can't be any of those theories because they're obviously wrong. So in a sense, they were all right, because they were indeed all wrong. A few years after the Apollo missions ended, a NASA publication said this: "In spite of everything that we have learned during the last few years, we still cannot decide between these three theories. We still need more data and perhaps some new theories before the origin of the moon is settled to everyone's satisfaction. What does it mean when you have several theories already, but you need some new ones? It means the ones you have are wrong. So evolutionists needed something new. Sure enough, a new theory soon came to the rescue. Yep, it's those asteroids again. You see, billions of years ago, a really big asteroid, one the size of Mars, crashed into the Earth. Both the asteroid and the Earth were broken up in this catastrophe. Lots of material was sprayed out into space. Some of it formed into the moon, and the rest of it came back down, back into the Earth. However, the iron from both bodies sank into the Earth's core, so this explains why the moon doesn't have much iron today. So how good is this theory? Well, the media will tell you that computer simulations have proven it to be true, but that's nonsense. First of all, computer simulations can never prove anything happened, only that it's one possibility for how something might have happened. Secondly, this model only works with very narrow parameters. You need an asteroid of exactly the right size, coming in at exactly the right speed, and exactly the right angle for this to be even possible. And there's lots of debate about whether or not it works even within these narrow boundaries. Even many evolutionists don't accept this model. For example, one evolutionary astrophysicist has complained, the collision has to be implausibly gentle. You practically need someone to hold a Mars-sized object just above Earth and drop it to avoid messing up Earth's orbit. Not only that, scientists recently took a closer look at some of the soil samples that astronauts brought back from the moon. They discovered that some of the samples contained water. This was a complete shock to evolutionists because the giant impact theory says that the moon can't have any water today. It would have been vaporized and lost during the collision. As one scientist commented, it's hard to imagine a scenario in which a giant impact melts completely the moon and at the same time allows it to hold on to its water. That's a really, really difficult knot to untie. Thanks to this new discovery, the giant impact hypothesis is in serious trouble. And that was the only idea that was remotely possible for an evolutionary origin of our moon. Sounds like evolution can't explain where the moon came from. The Bible was right all along. This shouldn't have surprised anyone though. All along, there's been a lot of evidence that the moon can't be billions of years old. For example, this is the Aristarchus Plateau. This is one of many locations on the moon that have been controversial for a long time. For centuries, people have seen flashes and temporary glows of light in these locations. These events don't last long, so it's been very difficult to photograph them. But we have written accounts of them going back to the 1500s. It seems that the moon is still geologically active, releasing gas from volcanic vents. This is the Eratosthenes crater, another location where unusual sightings have occurred. Evolutionists have rejected all these sightings as nonsense. In their models, the moon's volcanic activity stopped about 3.2 billion years ago. The moon is old, cold, and dead. It can't be geologically active, or so they've always said. Finally, though, all the accumulating evidence became too much. In 1968, NASA released its chronological catalog of reported lunar events. This report listed 579 separate sightings of anomalous events on the moon. A couple of years later, the Apollo 15 mission even measured radon gas coming from the Aristarchus crater. Apparently, the moon is still geologically active. This makes perfect sense if it was only a few thousand years old. It's not old, cold, and dead after all. The funny thing is, for the most part, evolutionists still won't admit any of this. In 2006, a study was published that said, well, we used to think that all geological activity stopped there 3.2 billion years ago, but now we admit we were wrong. It continued until 10 million years ago. They just have to stick with the millions of years. They just can't admit that the moon is young and that its geological activity is still going on today. After all, if the moon was young, then the Bible would be right, and they don't want that. There's still one final problem with the evolutionist model that we haven't discussed yet. When our astronauts went to the moon, they brought lots of experiments with them. One of those experiments was called LLR, or Lunar Laser Ranging. These were special mirrors that the astronauts left behind on the moon. These are the locations where the Apollo missions landed. Apollo 11, 14, and 15 were the three missions that left behind the LLR reflectors. The reflectors look like this. Scientists on the Earth can fire a laser at one of these reflectors, And if the laser hits the target directly, which is really hard to do, as you can imagine, but they are able to do this, then the laser bounces back to Earth. Scientists then measure how long the light took to return, and then they figure out exactly how far away the moon is from us. This is still being done today, by the way. It's the only Apollo experiment that's still going on. Here's why this is important. Scientists have discovered that the moon is moving further away from us every year. This was already suspected before Apollo, but now we've been able to measure it. So why is this happening? It's because the moon is raising ocean tides on the Earth. This causes our ocean to bulge towards the moon. However, the Earth is spinning underneath the bulge and pulling it forward. The bulge itself then exerts a gravitational pull on the moon, which accelerates it and moves it outward in its orbit. That's a complicated process, but don't worry about the details. The important part is this. The moon is moving away from the Earth at about 3.8 centimeters per year. That's about 1.5 inches each year. We've measured this for years, and we know exactly why it's happening. 1.5 inches per year doesn't sound like much, but the way this works, it would have been receding faster in the past. Looking backwards in time, the moon would have been much closer to the Earth than today. In fact, calculations show that the moon would have been touching the Earth only 1.5 billion years ago. Obviously, this is impossible. Obviously, the moon can't have been orbiting the Earth for 4 billion years, as evolutionists claim. By the way, I should mention that evolutionists have been trying to solve this problem. There are some articles floating around on the internet that say this isn't a problem for evolution anymore. But those articles are wrong. If you're curious why, you can go to www.creationastronomy.com for details. So here's what you're not being told about the moon. Evolution can't explain why it's there. Evolution can't explain why it's still geologically active. And evolution can't explain how it could be receding for billions of years. What the Bible says about the moon is true. The moon is young and designed just for us.